Welcome to my second video. Now, today I'm going to be doing a transition timeline video as requested by the followers on my Instagram. I'm going to hyper-focus really in this video just on my transition and the lead up to it. If I talk about every aspect of my life, this video would be 1,000 years long. So I'm just going to try and keep things as simple and straightforward as possible. So I've gathered as many photos as I can find from throughout my life, and we're just going to go through them chronologically. I'm going to stick them on screen. I've got them in front of me here as well, and I'm just going to talk as we go. Let's go. So, year 1, 1993. I was born. Classic rookie error. You see, this is where all my problems started. I lived with my parents and one of my older sisters, and the place where I lived is called Essex, which, for my international viewers, if you haven't heard of it, is famous for being a very fine, sophisticated and upstanding place to live. If anyone says anything to the contrary, frankly, they're lying. For obvious reasons, I don't have many memories to look back on at this point, being one. So, and especially not anything to do with being trans. So let's move on. Over the next few years, nothing particularly trans related happened either. A fair few trans people or their parents do start having their realisations around this time. But in my case, from what I remember and what my parents have told me, other than being a bit shy and quiet as I grew past being a toddler, there wasn't much unusual about me. I may be forgetting things that was an awfully long time ago, but as far as I can remember, I don't think I had any gender dysphoria of note at this point. My life was just all about crashing toy cars into each other and playing video games on my Sega Saturn and Star Wars. Some things never change. I still love Star Wars. I still love video games. I don't crash toy cars into each other anymore. I did go past that. I did crash my real car into a tree a few years ago. That wasn't quite as fun though, so you win some, you lose some. At this point in my life, I experienced my first jolt of maturity. It's when I remember becoming more self-aware and feeling more responsible for things. And for the first time, I started worrying about how people saw me and my value as a person. Around this time, I also had my first experience of gender dysphoria. And, it was quite simple, really. I felt envious about the girls at school and how boring I looked compared to them. And the thing is though, at the time, I didn't want to look like them. I didn't want long hair. I didn't want to dress like them. I just felt envious that I couldn't. But I didn't know why. I didn't think I hated my body, but I didn't particularly like it either. And I'd never heard of transgender before, so the prospect of feeling like I was in the wrong body wasn't really even in my imagination. I didn't know it was a thing that people could experience. In fact, I wouldn't actually learn what a transgender person was for another 7 years at this point in time. I like to refer to this stage in my transition as the sapling. The potential for growth is there, but it's not yet deeply rooted, nor is it really visible to anyone else yet. But it will be. The next few years would see the formation of the roots, the anchor for which much of my dysphoria would now be based. Puberty. By age 10, the question of why am I envious of girls was still floating in my head, but I didn't yet have an answer. But as primary school came to a close and secondary school started, and I had my formal sex education classes. To cut a long story short, I finally came to the grand realisation. I wasn't envious of girls at school because of their hair length or what they were wearing. I was envious because they wouldn't grow up to become men. And I figured out right then, I don't want to grow up and turn into a man. That's wrong. I want to grow up and I want to be... Oh. And there it was. I wasn't afraid of men or the male body on anyone else. Just the prospect of it happening to me. And I knew it wouldn't be sudden, it wouldn't be quick, it would be slow, and I'd be watching it happen bit by bit all the way. And yeah, I know, generally speaking, puberty can be scary for a lot of young people, even if they're not trans. But for me, it felt so much worse. I wasn't just anxious about it, I was absolutely terrified. As I've mentioned already, at this point in my life, I didn't know what transgender was. I didn't know that transitioning was a thing. I didn't think there was any alternative for me. I just thought, this is it, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I am absolutely certain that if I had known there was an alternative, I would have taken it. But I didn't. So I just let it fester in my brain. And I told no one. As 12 became 13, I started noticing some of the early signs of male puberty. I was growing taller. I was starting to get facial hair. My voice was getting deeper. My shoulders were getting wider. As all of this was going on, all I could think was, this is it. This is when I stop being happy forever. And there's nothing I can do about it. And that is a horrible prospect to try and live with. As if my body mutating wasn't bad enough. At this point in my puberty, I also developed bad acne as well, mostly on my face, back and shoulders, not just a few pimples every now and then. I mean a constant 5-10 new ones a day, no matter how much I washed. It was horrible. This is where it becomes hard to find pictures, because I rarely allowed any to be taken of me, except for a small handful of one-offs where I thought I got lucky with my face. So now, not only did I hate what my body was becoming in regards to my puberty, I also couldn't even stand looking at my face in the mirror. And it's at this age that any confidence or self-worth I felt I had just nosedived. I finally, after far too long, researched online why I was experiencing gender dysphoria and what it was. In that process, I discovered transgender people and how many there really are and how relatively quite common it is. I learned about HRT and surgeries and what life could be like for these people, and maybe even for me. It was a huge relief when I found all this out, because I wasn't alone anymore. I knew what I was experiencing wasn't just some random feeling that only I had. There were others, many others. And I felt I'd finally found the root of my biggest problems and the answer to my most desperate questions. And with all this new knowledge, I did nothing. It was scary. It was too much. I didn't know how to process this information. Around this time as well, I also started reading media online that was particularly harmful, and I convinced myself that, that this can't be real. This must just be my imagination. It's a phase. It's lasted a few years, but it will go away. I'm just a teenager. I'm confused. It will go away. There's no point thinking about it. There's no point doing anything about it. It's just a phase. That was wrong. As a result of that thinking, I had a very difficult couple of years, ages 15 to 16. And to be very frank, I was lucky to still be alive by the time I reached 17. It was a very bad couple of years. 17 to 18 is when I really started to come into my own. I felt much more adult. I didn't feel like a school kid anymore, and I got a bit better at standing up for myself. It was also when I embraced emo. Yes, 17 is a late age to start embracing it, but who cares? I liked it. I say that as someone who's nearly 30 and still dresses like an emo teenager. Make of that what you will. In all seriousness, it was actually an effective step towards bettering myself. A lot of the emo trends were focused on being unafraid of displaying emotion and utilizing that emotion in performance. And that sort of inspired me to be more open with people. And as a result, for the first time ever, 9 years since first questioning my gender, I actually spoke to someone about it. A girl at my school who I'd become very good friends with, and who I'm still very good friends with now. I didn't specifically come out as trans to her because I was still in denial that transitioning would ever be possible for me, but I did express my escalating discomfort with my body and how betrayed I felt by how life had turned out in this aspect, which was the first step at least, and it really helped take some of the pressure off. Despite how bad the previous couple of years had been, these 2 years, 17 to 18, I mostly look back on with good memories now. I still wish I hadn't been so in denial about my dysphoria at this point, because this time would have been perfect for coming out and for starting the ball rolling on seeking treatment. But unfortunately, I still had those articles in my head. I still had those things I read online in my head that were telling me that this will go away, that this is all in my imagination. And looking back, one of the biggest regrets I have in my life is allowing what I'd read, those articles, to have such a stranglehold on my life. As I turned 19, I started university in Lincoln, studying media production. Ultimately, it was a great choice. I loved Lincoln, I loved the uni, I loved my course, but being away from home, the people who I'd spoken to so much about my gender identity problems were now many miles away, and I never initially told any of my new friends about it at university. So I felt sort of isolated again. I thought about it more and more, and as I started living in my new apartment, realizing that my bedroom was mine and mine alone, I decided I have to know. So I ordered what was my first piece of feminine clothing, which was this black dress, and I eagerly anticipated it arriving, and when it did, I stood in front of my mirror and tried it on. And I felt stupid. I felt like I was wearing a costume. I felt like I was pretending to be a character that I wasn't. And most of all, I felt disappointed. I'd always hoped that maybe as soon as I put on a piece of clothing like that, maybe something would snap in my head and I'd think, wow, actually, I look okay. I think in that moment, I also realised that the feelings I had were absolutely 100% not just about clothing. I mean, I'd always known they weren't, but a small part of me had hoped I could put on a dress or something, and then suddenly these sad feelings I'd been harbouring for 11 years would just disappear, and I'd figure out I just wanted to be a drag queen or something. But that wasn't the case at all. The knock-on effects of this was that I started slipping back into my deep depression again, slowly but surely, over the next couple of years. Every other aspect of my uni life was going really well, but as it had for the previous decade, my dysphoria overpowered everything that was good. It wasn't until my final year of university that I actually told a couple of housemates about everything. And they were lovely and understanding and supportive, and they helped me feel more comfortable. I tried dressing in a more feminine way again, but just like last time, I felt like an imposter. And ultimately, it just made me feel more sad. I actually ended up trying to masculinize myself instead by growing a beard, among other things, to try and cancel out the dysphoria, but obviously that didn't work. And it might just be me, but I think the best I ever looked as a guy was with that beard. I don't know, there's something about it. Maybe it's generous of me to refer to that as a beard. Maybe because it's such a stark contrast to me now. I actually don't hate these pictures. Finally, in the summer of 2015, my university course ended. But rather than moving back home, as a lot of students do, I decided I wanted to stay in Lincoln for a while. So I rented an apartment on my own. This would turn out to be a catastrophic mistake. In retrospect, maybe I felt like moving back home was a step backwards from my university life. Maybe I just didn't feel ready to have a career in my field, or maybe I just wasn't ready to leave what little of the life I had made behind. I honestly can't remember. But I got a part-time job, I got myself a little apartment, and I tried to live independently for 6 months. I even got myself a pet, a baby bearded dragon called Mochi, who I'm very happy to say is still with me today. In September, 3 months into living alone, I had my graduation ceremony at Lincoln Cathedral. This day was supposed to be so special, something that I'd remember for the rest of my life, and it certainly was, but not for good reason. These pictures are what I often regard as some of the worst in my life, and I feel like the toll of my living situation is reflected in these, especially when comparing them to just a few months earlier when I lived with friends, or good lord, especially when comparing them to pictures from today. I see a deeply unhappy person in the pictures from that day. In fact, I barely even recognize them as me anymore. On the transition side of things, during these 6 months of living alone, I did research again into how transitioning works and how I could go about getting it. But with the public health service wait times of up to 3 years and private healthcare costs being up in the thousands, I reluctantly had to admit that even if I allowed myself to accept that I was trans, the likelihood of getting any treatment for it anytime soon was very low. This remained on my mind a lot, and combined with my new, very lonely and solitary lifestyle, my mental health just absolutely spiraled out of control. And by October, November of that year, I was in the worst mental health state that I've ever been in my entire life. And so, for the second and final time, I tried to end it. Unsuccessfully, obviously. This time was very different from the first, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. Maybe I'll talk about that another time. So for now, I'm going to move on. So feeling completely exhausted and defeated, by the Christmas of 2015, I moved back home with my parents in the hopes that 2016 would be a better year. Fingers crossed. So, early 2016, I felt much safer and less alone with my new living arrangements, and being back home, I started to reconnect with my old friends again. That led me to getting a job, which allowed me to be financially independent. This in turn meant I knew I had the funds to afford to get treatment at a private gender clinic in London, which was now only about half an hour train away. But I still didn't feel I could mentally go through with it. I was 23. I thought to myself that it was too late. Puberty has done the damage and there's no fixing it. Well, then into my life comes my fiance. Even before our first date, the subject of my gender identity had come up in conversation, and it was something she knew a fair bit about already. She's not trans, but she does keep herself very well informed about these kinds of things. And she very quickly became someone who I could open up to more than ever before. We talked about it more and more over the following months. And the more open I was about it, and the more honest I was about it, the more I had to acknowledge that now this is actually something I can fix. I was sick of letting myself suffer as a result of my own inaction. And so I sought, finally, after 14 years, to resolve that. The first step I thought I should take was to come out to my parents, which I did. There was a lot of explaining and personal history to discuss, but ultimately they voiced their support, which I didn't doubt would be the case, but still it was a huge relief. Soon after, I had my first ever appointment with the private gender clinic in London. It was scary at first because I couldn't quite believe that finally all of this was becoming so real. But the doctors there did an amazing job helping me relax and, more importantly, to truly understand the process of transitioning on a medical level. Every little detail was discussed, which helped me feel like I was in safe hands. And after several months of physical and psychological tests, I was cleared for the prescription of HRT. And in December of 2016, I got my first dose. Just 1 year since I tried to take my own life, I was now taking the medication necessary to save it. And the second I had that first dose, the second I put that patch on my body for the first time, I knew my life was going to change forever. I know that sounds corny as hell, but it's true. I still had trauma in my life, but everything felt so much calmer. I felt a serenity with myself that I'd never thought possible. And this was just after starting hormones, before much of my life would even change in a major way. I still wasn't super hyped about dressing in an overtly feminine way. My dysphoria was linked entirely to my body as opposed to what I was wearing. For me, the clothing and aesthetic would come in time should I want it. But for now, I wasn't entirely uncomfortable wearing my normal clothes, although I did experiment on occasion. The effects of HRT really started hitting hard in year 2 and 3, the fat redistribution especially. In the space of a year, I put on no weight, but went up 2 jeans sizes. The same would gradually be true of my chest as well. My jawline curved, my hair became fuller, and my skin became much softer and healthier looking. By year 2, I'd also finished my laser hair removal for my face, so the prospect of a 5 o'clock shadow was now also removed. Emotionally, I did become more prone to displaying affection and sadness more often, but if anything, I was more in control of my emotions than I'd ever been in my life. 2019 was a really good year for me. It was the year I got much more bold with how I presented myself. It was the year I gained a lot more confidence in myself. It was the year I came out to a lot of people who hadn't previously known that I was trans, which obviously is always a huge deal. There were a lot of milestones. It was the year I started presenting at work, which was a major deal. I was working at this point as a bar manager, so not only did I have the pressure of adjusting to presenting at work in front of hundreds of strangers, but I also had to remain capable of being authoritative under those same circumstances, which it honestly was quite a difficult combo to pull off simultaneously. But in the end, I think what it did was it forced me to stop caring so much about what people thought of me. My priorities shifted in and out of work from how people perceived me to how I was objectively handling any situation I was in. I still had days where I did worry about how I looked, but it really was just a handful of days. It wasn't the focus of every social situation I was in, which for the first couple of years of my transition, it was. From then to right now, things have only really gotten much better. I've gained more confidence in myself. I've learned to adapt better to changing circumstances. I don't hold myself to impossible standards anymore. And ultimately, I am a much, much happier person than I was 4 years ago. And honestly, I cannot justifiably put into words just how much that is the case. When I look back at some of these old pictures, I cannot believe that they are the same person. It feels like I'm looking through the photo album of a stranger. And I guess in regards to who I am nowadays compared to then, that's sort of true. Not just because I look different now, but because I am different. I feel alive and authentic now, not like I'm hiding or living a lie anymore. And I believe that has far more prolific effects on your personality than anything else. I suppose if there's one lesson I can take away from my experience, one piece of advice that I can pass on to some of you, maybe some of you who are coming to terms with all this, maybe some of you who have friends who are dealing with this. If there's one piece of advice I can offer, it's talk. Talk to someone. This is the kind of thing that will eat you up inside, and nobody should have to deal with that. I don't think anybody can deal with this alone. And there's always going to be someone who will listen to you and who cares about what you're going to say. You don't deserve to suffer in silence. Obviously, we are all different. We all live under different circumstances, different situations. So I can't tell you who it is you should talk to. That needs to be your decision to make. But even having one person who you can speak to about this is 1,000 times better than having nobody at all. Thank you so much for watching my video. I really appreciate it. I apologise if the subject matter got a little bit heavy in places. This was intended to be quite a light-hearted video, but you know, I think that kind of thing is still important to talk about, and maybe I'll go into more details about that kind of thing in another future video. Take good care of yourselves. Happy New Year. Let's hope 2021 is better than 2020. It's a pretty low bar, but depending on how that goes, this video will either now age very well or very badly. We'll see. In this video, I've touched on some pretty heavy subjects, especially regarding mental health and depression. So I've linked some good resources in the description of this video, which could be helpful if that is something you are dealing with. And like I said, you should never let anything like this eat you up inside. You should always talk to someone. Don't let yourself suffer in silence. You don't deserve that. Take care.